Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jessica Craho with the Iowa Coalition for Integration and Employment and your Iowa Employment First Leadership Team. Welcome to the Iowa Community of Practice for February 13th. We're excited to have you all. Can I get a quick audio check here while we do some housekeeping? If you could just type in either like the questions, pod there. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Clint. Appreciate it. So before we get started, we'll be recording today's webinar, and I'll be sure to make that available to the mailing list, as well as post it on YouTube afterwards in the archive. You can receive ongoing education credit for participating in today's webinar. You just need to let me know that you're participating and that you would like that certificate. You can let me know, again, either in the question or the chat pods, or you can send me an email directly requesting that certificate, and I'll be happy to get it back out to you. There will be a poll or evaluation that'll launch after the webinar. So if you could just take a quick second to answer two multiple choice questions. I kept it really simple for you, yes or no. I'd really appreciate the feedback. And I think without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to today's presenters. We have Diane Hernandez with Iowa Workforce Development, Michelle Dickerson with Voc Rehab, and Shannon Myers with the Department for the Blind. Myers, sorry, I left out the E in her name, that kind of helps. But we're really excited to have the ladies here today, not only representing their individual agencies, but also to talk with you about how they collaborate with each other and also with community rehabilitation providers in the community to help get those integrated competitive employment outcomes that we're all looking for. So we're really excited to have them here and to talk to us about the integrated resource team, again, as well as some other strategies for collaboration to help our job seekers. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Diane Hernandez to start us off.
All right, well, hi, everyone. We're here today to talk about collaborating and specifically collaborating within the integrated resource team concept. So we're going to start out talking about, and we've all heard this and we think about it a lot, but I don't know that you can revisit this idea often enough of the fact that we tend to, by nature, end up pulling out into silos that people are operating in. So here's vocation, here's even within vocation, we'll be like, here's the CRP's role and here's this person's role, and we're all operating in these completely different silos. If you have ever gotten caught in this system, either within the vocational rehabilitation program, medical models are really bad about this. So like personally this is always my example of why I'm so passionate about collaboration. So I had a family member who we got into some medical situations with where I was the dude with the umbrella, man. I was trying to go between all these different specialists who were contradicting themselves, honestly. Like I had one specialist say that this particular family member needed psych meds, and I had a psychiatrist saying, no, there's medical issues. And we ended up going up to Mayo to do their integrated care program there. And if you've ever done Mayo, when you do that, you go up there and you meet with one doctor right after another. And from walking to one doctor to the next one, that doctor's reading those notes. So that when you get in there and you start to tell your story again, as our customers have to do over and over again, tell your story just over and over again. When you go in to tell your story again, the second doctor stops you and says, no, I just read the notes from your last appointment. I know exactly what you're talking about. I already got all that information. And you're like, wait, what? And then at the end of the day, they're like, oh, we all talked to each other, and here's the plan that we all came up with together. And I literally started crying, not because they'd solved the problem, not because everything was fixed, but literally because the doctors were talking to each other and I no longer had to walk this tightrope. And just the burden that got lifted off of me. So that's where my personal passion, not necessarily where I'm also highly encouraged to do collaboration as part of my job, but my personal passion for it comes from this, just trying to get out of that process. So then when we're thinking about the person, a person is a collection of, the people that we deal with will have a whole lot of different needs. There'll be financial needs, transportation needs, housing needs, medical needs. And if we look at all of that within that silo process, it can be very, very overwhelming. So how do we get it so that it feels like a little dude in the picture who's surrounded by all these different service providers so that there's an interconnectivity to it? What are some strategies and techniques that we can use in order to create that? What can we do to create a little less fatigue of the alphabet soup? Now, how many times do we all get talking and they start going, wait, what is it? Wait, what does this letter mean? Wait, what does this letter mean? Like trying to help not even think about the letters, right? One of the things that I will feel in the IRT concept and when we're doing really, really strong collaboration is that the person sort of, we know what our roles are and we know where those boundaries are and we all know how we're like keeping with HIPAA but yet not bundling and braiding funds, and we know all of that stuff. But for the person, I'm hoping that it doesn't feel like this, like I've just got all these letters swirling around me and I don't even know what's going on. So fortunately for me, who has this passion for that, I am the Disability Resource Coordinator for Region 11. And through that, I work for the Disability Employment Initiative, which I'm just going to read now. Improve education, training, and employment opportunities and outcomes for individuals with disabilities who are unemployed, underemployed, and or receiving SSDI or SSI benefits. And so the grant comes from the Office of Disability Employment Policy and the Department of Labor. There's a large grant, there's many elements to it, but this IRT concept is one of the most important. And one of the things that we've really pulled out is evidence-based. If anybody reads through the WIOA legislation, you're going to see the integrated resource team mentioned over and over again in that as evidence-based practice that was developed through the Disability Employment Initiative. So the integrated resource team is the opportunity to create a world where the person feels like one big hug. So it's to pull everything together. My coworker gives this, so when we think about integrated resource teams, a lot of times we just the tendency is to go to like, oh yeah, I've done that, because if you've ever been part of an IEP or any other kind of family team meeting, you may feel that, okay, I've done that. I've met with groups of people who were serving a person. And not to flash on those concepts or to say that it's not done the way that we do it all the time. But one of the things that we work out really hard in the integrated resource team is to avoid sort of the a la carte method of providing services. So a lot of times the a la carte method, and my coworker has always used the example of if you're going to Burger King and you order a Whopper, you can't get a Whopper because they don't have it there. I have Shannon sitting next to me, so I'm going to go into I'm going to add a healthy eating method to that because Shannon's our healthy eater. But we've got, within the integrated resource team, we try not to do okay, so you walk into McDonald's and you pick off a menu that's already there. You might be able to tweak it a little bit. I'll order a hamburger with cheese, or I'll order, whatever, but it's all already there. So a lot of times when you go into these meetings, you're thinking, what are the services that can be provided and how can we blend and braid funds to make those services work? That sounds like a perfectly reasonable approach to working with the people that we serve. However, in the integrated resource team, we try to start from what does the person need and then back out from that. So when we're doing the integrated resource teams, we go in and we say, hey, what does this person need? It's really designed to help you think outside the box. So both in the creation of the integrated resource team, I just did an integrated resource team last week. That was an individual who was interested in employment, possibly within the trades, possibly an apprenticeship. That integrated resource team involved one other provider and 4 different people from 4 different trade organizations, the carpenters trade, the laborers. I've done integrated resource teams where certainly we're going to want to bring in natural supports of all kinds, but we will bring in business supports, financial people who just have some level of financial expertise about kind of some sort of situation that the person is in, trying to figure out how to refi a car loan. I mean, just there's all kinds of different things that our people will need to be able to make their situations work. Who do we need to bring to the table? So in the creation of that, we're thinking a little outside the box about who needs to come to the table, and we're really letting the customer drive who they think is being most helpful to them. And then from there, then we kind of come up with a plan. So starting with the problem and then coming up with a plan, as opposed to saying, these are the things that are provided, how can that make a plan? Okay, so it's a little bit of a different way of looking at that process. So I'm going to stretch my coworkers thing a little bit more. If you walked into McDonald's and asked for sushi, you could not get it, thank God, because that's really gross. But if we go into an integrated resource team and realize that what the person needs is sushi, then we're going to maybe go to the store, buy some rice, buy some fish, get a tutorial and one of those little bamboo things and figure out how to make sushi. So that's kind of how we think this approach works differently than others. We've got an individual with multiple needs and barriers, lack of coordination, they get stuck. We've got a team led by the job seeker, 100% led by the job seeker, no matter how many family members in the room, it's led by the job seeker, no matter how many providers in the room, it's led by the job seeker. The DRC is only the facilitator, which is good. We've got expertise. We don't want to rely on the DRC to solve the problems because she's just not that magic. So she's going to facilitate a group of people to help find their answer to that problem. Expertise in partnering is key, and the plan is not about the solution. And I guess that's what I was getting to earlier. The plan is not about finding the solution, it's about the puzzle. How do we we've got a vision of what you look on the box and you see that you've got a puppy. How do you get the puppy? And if you've lost a piece, how do you kind of draw that piece in so that you get a puppy? And it evolves, and it's not tied to funding. We figure out what the plan is, and then we figure out how to fund it. We don't figure out what the funding is, and then figure out what the plan is. So, going to start out, we've got Michelle Dickerson on the line. Hey, Michelle. Still here?
Sorry, guys. I had to get myself unmuted, but yes, I'm here.
All right. So we were going to offer up, some people that we've done IRTs with. We'll probably go off slide a bit to talk about people that we've, both the ladies that are in the room I've done a lot of IRTs with, so we've got a lot of examples to pull from.
Yeah.
But Michelle, do you want to talk? I've been talking for a while. Do you want to talk a little bit about Sarah?
Sure. So first I'll just kind of read from the slide here so you can get the background information. But Sarah, we've got in here a 54-year-old woman with learning disabilities. For years, she's worked in an optician office, but did not find success in those jobs. I would say even after we started working with her, there was still a lot of pull to continue to go for those jobs. And one of the nice things about working in an IRT is that, everybody brings a piece to the puzzle. So, you have a client that's continuing to go for the same types of jobs. They're not working for them. Maybe they even stay there for several months. Maybe you even close their file successfully, but then they come back and it's just not working. So with an IRT team, we're really able to kind of sit down and try to figure out what is the root of the problem, or, does it really make sense to continue to go for those types of jobs? And that's really what we had to do for Sarah. Let's take a look at that. She had a lot of struggles with anxiety and self-confidence. I would say when we first started working with her, that was probably something that came out the most, because she could go into an interview and she could actually do fairly well. I think she could sell herself at times, but once things started going, I think people start to notice that her confidence is kind of low. So one of the things that she did, she participated in Dress for Success, and that was something, and honestly, I sent several clients that way when we're looking at things like self-esteem or being able to socialize with others and be confident. And of course, there's so many other great things they learn there, like work skills, maybe get some interview attire. do some mock interviewing. There's just so many pieces to that program that are helpful. And I would say between Diane and myself, you know, when we're thinking of, kind of like Diane said, somebody comes in and they have this set of problems or limitations, and you're, you know, I think maybe when you first get started in the field, you're like, oh, I can offer all this stuff. I should just tell them what all I offer. But that's really not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is to sit back and listen to what those issues are. And sometimes within your own agency, you have the answers, but sometimes there's other community providers that you need to reach out to. So for her, this was a situation where we were really able to kind of brainstorm together to figure out what resources are available that she could access that would get her on the right path. So we really needed to address the anxiety and the self-confidence. And she went through that program, and she did very well. I would say towards the end, I kind of noticed her wanting to still kind of go in that same direction with applying for optician offices. But I can tell you her interviewing skills, the way she presented herself, all of that, I saw complete change. There was still obviously some work to do, because when you're in a program like that, you know, you're doing really well while the program's going, but what happens when the program ends and you don't still have that kind of uplifting experience? So that's something as her team that at times we have to kind of step in and assist her with that, or connect her to more resources. She also has shoulder and back issues, so there are other limitations beyond her learning disability and some of those confidence struggles that we have to keep in mind. So this would be an individual that, I don't know how familiar everybody is with a VR eligibility process, but we look at what are the different barrier areas. And this would be an individual that has barriers in multiple different areas. So again, you know, having to sit or stand for real long is going to be difficult for her. So when she connects with an employer, it's really important that she's going to have those accommodations. With working within an IRT, one thing I can tell you is that it's really nice because all of us are going to have different business connections. Sometimes we have connections that a person is looking for, and sometimes we don't, and we have to develop that. But when you have somebody that does have certain limitations, maybe they're not going to interview well, maybe they can't sit or stand for too long, and you're going to need accommodations. When you are able to go to an employer that you know, and you know the people in HR, and you're willing to talk on behalf of that person, it really goes a long way. And when you're working in a team with other people, you're not just relying on one team member to have those connections. So between Diane and I, you know, as we continue to work with this individual, we're able to think of, okay, who do we know at that employment site that can help us out with this? Okay, so reaching out and finding others to help you out. And then strong in our personal skills. So again, there were times that she could interview well. I think it just kind of depended on how things were going for her that day. And she could sometimes really get her foot in the door, but it was a matter of how are we going to keep that job. I can give you a little bit of an update. This individual is currently working some part-time hours, and we're still kind of looking at that big picture goal, and you know, does she want to continue to stay where she's at, or does she need to expand her hours? And her goal is really to expand those hours. So that is something that we've continued to work on as a team. There's been times where we've gone in different directions and looked towards jobs that she's identified wanting. But after much exploration and kind of figuring out, okay, can you truly do all those different pieces of the job, we've had to come back to the table. I would say, and Diane, you can agree or disagree on this, but I'd say we've come together as a team several times to readdress or maybe kind of reset our trajectory, because we've gone one route and realized that wasn't quite the path we needed to go. And so the best thing to do in those situations, especially when you're working with a client that does have several limitations and barriers and things that need figured out, when I get stuck or I'm not sure where to go next, I absolutely always bring the team back together.
Right.
Diane,
yeah, first of all, I moved the Mikey thing, I don't know what this thing is, the spaceshipy thing that's in front of me. I moved a little bit closer to my face, so hopefully the people who've been having questions about being able to hear me, hopefully I project pretty well, but I think maybe I was having a problem with directing it towards the spaceship thing. The other thing that I wanted to clarify, just that everybody knows, just made like a little note about it. All of these people are real people, but we gave them pseudonyms. So Sarah's name isn't really Sarah, and that picture is not really Sarah. So if you know this chick in the picture, oops, we stole it off the internet. It's not a real, I mean, she's a real person. I'm sure she's quite delightful. I just don't know her. I know the actual person behind the pseudonym. The other thing is, yes, and the important thing with this particular case, I would say, and the IRT concept in here is that we have pulled in multiple different people into this IRT process to help us solve the question of, because she does have learning disabilities, and they're complex sort of learning disabilities. It's not like just, it's some processing issues. And she's one of these people with learning disabilities who presents so well that you kind of are like, it's a little bit harder to grasp. There's a problem. It's kind of, I work a lot with brain injury, and the theory of mild brain injury is kind of not correct, because just because it was a mild brain injury, technically, doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't create more barriers. She has a learning disability that she still presents, and she's very smart, and she has a lot of common sense, and she's strategic in the way she thinks, and she can do a lot of really heavy, higher level thinking. So, I mean, it's still a learning disability, and it's a little bit harder to like kind of nail down. And then when you combine that with the anxiety and confidence that she's had from struggling in different jobs, then the way that the anxiety and lack of confidence combine with the learning disability makes it really hard to part and parcel out. Is it really that you can't do this, or is it that you think you can't? Like it's very, very difficult to kind of like feel all that out. So we have been working with different businesses. We worked with Unity Point because she is interested in the healthcare field to part and parcel out like different jobs, done some job shadowing, worked very closely with them to get her exposure to a lot of different jobs. The part-time job that she has is an observation monitor. That's done really well, but that tends to just be a part-time job, and she does want to have full-time work. And then we're also working with Passageway to create some other work experiences. So there's a lot of, and that's going to give us a lot more, and we're doing all of these things and working really closely with the employers to kind of part and parcel all that out and sort of figure out, okay, are we providing opportunities where we can get a better understanding of what strengths are and what compensatory strategies are for the things that she's not doing well. But we have to get in with employers that we know really, really well, because it can't just be we placed you and then on the outside we're kind of trying to figure out how to compensate, because we really need to get a lot of good feedback from the employer. And so we've had, there's been a lot of people, the people from Dress for Success have been involved in the team. It's, like I said, it's not about the solution, it's about the puzzle, and it's about the it's, like everybody's life, it's about kind of figuring out as you go. Like, I'm not fully formed yet. So, we're all kind of working on it as we go, and we've been working for a while with her and coming up with some stuff. And this is definitely, I always put this into any presentation that I do on collaboration, is the idea that some things are just a two-brain job. Some things can feel kind of duplicative in the sense that, I as a DRC can do a lot of things similar to Voc Rehab, and all the time we don't need both of us, and I am super happy to back out whenever that's a plausible option. But when just there's things that you just can't, you need somebody to bounce off of, and so the IRT process, you do that as well.
And Diane, would you agree that with this individual and through the process we've been through, I would say there's been she's had a lot of questions. She's kind of like me in the sense that she wants to make sure she has all of her options laid down and she's really thought through them all. And I think in her situation, it's been really helpful to have the team to kind of bounce those ideas off of. But in the end, it's more of she gets to take whatever feedback we've given, and she's always gone and thought about it and kind of made up her own decision. So while the team is still there to help give her, I think she's had to come from a standpoint of kind of learning a little bit more about herself, because otherwise we go in several different directions. But when the team's able to kind of bring it back in, you know, she'll bring up new points and we can give feedback. Well, then she can take that and consider her options. And then I think that's probably about the best way we've made progress, is that she really has to make that decision on how she wants to move forward.
For sure, and I think that's one of the areas where having this IRT model to work with has been really helpful, in the sense that I think because she wants to know that she's covering every base possible, having more than one person in the room sort of bounce those ideas off, but to be doing it in a collaborative way, not she's talking about ideas with you, and then she's coming over and she's talking about ideas with me, and I'm not really sure what you said, and then like when that could get really confusing. And I know that through the process, when there's been a lot of ideas bouncing around, we've done things like create spreadsheets so that all these different ideas get put on a spreadsheet so that we see how we're following along with those ideas. That was a collaborative thing that grew out of one of the IRT meetings, in order to make sure that we were just sort of because maintaining focus has been difficult, but not impossible, and has definitely grown easier over time.
Absolutely.
And now I would like Shannon to talk.
Hi, this is Shannon Myers from Iowa Department for the Blind, and I hope I say John's name and not the person's name, because I don't know this person as John. But let's talk about John. Before we talk about John, I do want to just give some tips on the IRT. I think one of the things that Iowa Department for the Blind has done really, really well is we've worked with our population really, really well. But we've done it mostly just by ourselves for a really, really, really long time. And that worked until it didn't work. And luckily, WIOA came along, and that forced us to work with our partners, which has been a really, really great thing now that we've figured out how to do that. The one thing that we have decided to change at our agency is by embracing IRTs now that we're doing them more often. Some of the people at our agency didn't really understand how an IRT was different than just displaying the services that you already have. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. Is IRTs are not just going in there and just meeting and having a team meeting. It is looking at the person almost as an outsider and learning all of the different areas of barriers, and all of the solutions are on the table. And so much so that you don't even have the answers to some of the solutions, and you might have to bring in people that you've never worked with before, because you're not letting funding dictate what the solutions are. You're not letting any sort of barrier define where you're going to go. And that is, even if the barrier is yourself. So if you are used to always doing things a certain way, this is taking it really outside of that and looking to the resources in your community, within the group, within the person themselves. The client is the one that's driving the meeting, and Diane did touch on that. And I think that's very different from the model that we're so used to doing. Is here's the services that we offer. Now let's fit you into one of these services. It's very different than that. It's what are you wanting to do, and let's figure it out. And we don't have the answers some of the times. I can't tell you how many times Diane and I and the IR team has met with somebody where we've had to have multiple meetings. Maybe we missed something. Maybe we learned new information, and then we meet again, and maybe it's a different group that comes around the table.
Yeah, I would challenge everybody to use the IRT concept to try to, when you're sitting down, to think about, like, okay, so we went to this great presentation, and they were awesome. And so now I have all this great new stuff that I'm so excited about because they were so awesome. Then you're going to say, okay, now I'm going to do this myself. And you start thinking about, well, okay, who are the people that this person's working with? Who are the natural supports? Work with your individual, always work with your individual, but I would highly encourage you and the individual to really work hard to figure out how can we think outside the box of the services that we've been provided so far, for a number of reasons. One is, even if it's bringing in a business, if it's bringing in an expert on some other area, whatever, for a couple of reasons. One, that does expand your area of resources, right? That's cool. The other thing is that the IRT can be a really important tool, instrumental tool in getting rid of groupthink. So groupthink would be when you, I mean, like I love working with Shannon, and Shannon and I see each other about every other day, maybe more. But if we bring in somebody else into the team, then the groupthink that we may not even realize, these things that our minds are just kind of melded together to do, we're going to be able to expand it out and be able to think about other options because we've got somebody challenging us in that meeting to look at it in a different way.
Like Diane says, it really forces you outside of your comfort zone, but because it does that, you become really better at what you do because you learn about other perspectives. Now, yes, I'm not going to lie to you, you do have to go back to your office and figure out how do you fit this solution into your program and where to find funding, but that's why we need to know people like Diane because there are other flexible funding streams out there that you can tap into, and it's not all on you. So let's talk about John, and I hope I don't say his actual name, but I might. If I do, I apologize, and he'll be okay with it. So he's 53 years old, he is blind, and let me tell you the rest of the story before I get into it. He came to us from another state. He was a person that had worked, he has a very professional job, and I'm not going to say where, but a very professional job, you know, working in an office setting, and he came to Iowa from the East Coast for this job. He didn't know anybody here, and so he was working in this job. And John, just like a lot of the clients that come to us, came to us from a retention case standpoint. What's a retention case? A retention case is when someone calls you and they need help because their job is in danger of being eliminated based on performance. So he was in a very performance-related environment, and he was not able to meet the standards of the work. Not because he couldn't meet the standards of the work, but he is a person who is very, I don't want to say the word resistant because but I can't think of another word to describe it. But he is kind of resistant to using any alternative techniques, any assistive technology. He doesn't like having a disability. He doesn't want anyone to know about it. The place where he's at is very open to accommodating, but he does not want to ask for any help. He feels as if he's tried it all, he's done it all, he knows it all, and he doesn't know how we're going to do it any other way. And so he came to Iowa Department for the Blind very, very resistant to doing anything different than how things were working in the past. He obviously has had a bad experience at some point down the road. The business where he was at wanted to save his job, but he did not want to stay there. So when he was working, I'm an employment specialist, so my job is very different in the fact that I only work with businesses. And counselors at our agency refer clients to work with me. So when he was referred to work with me, of course, I tried to get him to stay where he was already full-time employed, had great benefits, and was making a wonderful salary. He did not want to stay there, though. It was a very production-based environment. He felt like he was never going to meet those rates of production. And he had, at some point in his career, he had worked or said he had worked somewhere where he made about twice as much and worked for a small business and did it on a very project-based environment. And that's what he wanted. He wanted to work when he wanted to work. He wanted to not use assistive technology, and he wanted to make twice what he was making. And that's what he was demanding that I find for him. And he gave me a deadline of 24 hours from now to find that for him. So that's how we started off the conversation, with him demanding a timeline of 24 hours to get him a job, making twice as much with a small business, and had no time frames in place. And so we quickly moved our conversation to scopes of services, because we were not involved in an IRT yet, okay? So I exhausted all efforts on my end to help with placement for this individual. He did not want to keep the relationship where he was at. So I started pulling in resources. I started talking to Diane about benefits planning. I started talking to Diane about getting him to be a member at Iowa Workforce. I started talking to other job developers So I started talking to CISL. So CISL is Central Iowa Center for Independent Living. And so after a while with working with me, there was no change because he still wanted this job where he made it twice as much and did work whenever he wanted to work. And so I said, okay, let's try someone new. So he tried someone new. It was the same conversation. They did some work experiences, trying to get him some information about just the labor market in Iowa since he was new. The pay is different here. The work structure is different here. So that's kind of where they were coming from. Always from the East Coast, maybe he has a misperception of how work is in Iowa. And so they got to a point where they exhausted all of their efforts. And so while Diane was still in the loop of things, we thought, okay, we've tried all of these things with this person. Let's try something else. So we still hadn't gotten to an IRT. We decided to do a reverse job fair. Again, he was very resistant to doing a reverse job fair because he's very resistant to being seen as having a disability. So him and I had to have a very, very long conversation about how a reverse job fair is for everyone of any. You know, it's not like even a level of disability. A reverse job fair just could be for anybody that doesn't have a disability. It's just a great concept. And so he hesitantly participated, and he was actually very glad that he did participate in this. He was able to gather some career-related information that he might not have otherwise gathered about the different opportunities out there, because he was very, his idea of getting a job was just applying for jobs. He didn't want to network, even though he didn't know a single person in the community. So, you know, the next point on this slide is he had confidence issues based on disability experience. He truly is one of those individuals that does not want to use anything differently or do his job any differently, even though an employer would be more than happy to provide accommodations. So through the reverse job fair, I did see him a little bit more energized through that process. It was one of the first times that I myself, as a job developer, started to have a little bit of hope to see, okay, maybe there is a little bit of chance for us to maybe change his thought processes on employment. And truly at this point, he was kind of holding on to hope to get placed through the reverse job fair, but that still didn't work for him. And so Diane was like, let's do an IRT. And I was kind of still on the fence because I was like, Diane, we've all talked with him, you know, we've all worked with him, we've done all of the things. How is an IRT going to be different? Because this IRT was a little different because it was kind of small. It was just me, the client, the counselor that was working with him, CISL, and Diane. And I'm like, we've all worked with him in depth. How is this going to be very different? So we actually took on different roles. I said, okay, you know, I found myself being very emotional about it because I have been emotionally invested in this case for several years. He's been verbally abusive to me, confrontational, in my face, and there was no other way for me to be about this case rather than being emotional. So I said, you know what, I'm going to facilitate a meeting, and I'm going to facilitate it in such a case that I'm going to allow my client to have the opportunity for him to be front and center. And so I did disclose that. I said, I'm going to facilitate this conversation, and the reason I'm facilitating it instead of you is so that you get the chance to drive the meeting and not have to have the burden of being the meeting manager. So I kept time limits, I kept boundaries, and then Diane Hernandez, being the professional that she is, she pointed out something to John, to him in his presentation about how I always said confrontational. And this, if you tell someone who's confrontational that they're confrontational, guess what? It's a confrontational conversation. But I kept using the same words and hoping that if I said them louder, maybe, that he would understand it better. But Diane presented it in such a way that I think at the day that I retire, I will still remember this conversation. And Diane just presented it in such a way that only Diane Hernandez can present it. And she focused on it being like really good skill set, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to use his tone of voice in such a way that it commands attention. And the other thing I haven't explained is his use of language.
He's a really articulate guy.
Very articulate. And you could tell he's one of those people that took like 3 hours to craft an email with like a thesaurus open and just saying things in such a way, and with a New York accent, that it was very intimidating too, because he's confrontational. And the confrontational was around, he was putting up a wall because he didn't want disability to be seen. And so Diane was able to frame it in a point where she was saying how articulate he was and how articulate was coming off. She wasn't saying confrontational, but she was just saying, honestly, the same thing I was saying, the same thing Sissel was saying, the same thing his counselor was saying, the same thing 20 different paid professionals in his life, but she said it in a different way. And she said it in such a way that it changed him. It changed his perspective. It changed how he thought about himself. It had changed his approach. And so I can't even explain to you how valuable it is for you to just not be the leader and not be the quarterback of your own client, and bring in another professional that can just look at it from an outside perspective. And that's why I truly love the IRT component, because Diane was able to move him.
Well, and just say something differently, not because Diane's awesome, but because,
Diane is awesome.
but that wasn't it, honestly. It was because from a different place, from a different relationship, you can say things differently. Like,
right.
That's just a fact. So the more that you can pull your team together so that you have people even from different agencies and from different outlooks and from different positions, you are able to make headway just simply because you're offering that new perspective. And that's what I'm really hoping that you understand of this whole concept. This is more than a team meeting. This is approaching conceptually how you're handling the integration and coordination of activities so that you're expanding the opportunities, the vision, the perspectives, so that we're really creating a better community that both feels inclusive and feels like that big giant hug, but also can feel a little bit push us out of our comfort zone too, because that's what a real true community does.
You have to let go of even the idea that you're right and that you know your client and that you have the answers, or that you will even offer a solution that you could even offer as a service. So John is now working, and he's working for a business that was part of the reverse job fair, not this reverse job fair, but a previous reverse job fair. Now, this business is a very small employer, and this business, after they had interaction with people with disabilities, the head HR person emailed me and told me, send me everyone that you have. This was amazing. It's been incredible working with your client. And through that positive interaction from previous reverse job fairs, the conversation with Diane allowed John to come back to me and said, okay, I have this information. Shannon, who should I apply with? And I said, go talk to this business. They've hired from us in the past. I don't know if they're going to meet your salary requirements, but it'll definitely be a good fit for someone that's smaller in nature and not as process involved. And so with Diane just stating the same thing in a different way, he was able to come back to me and for us to move forward with a working relationship. Whereas before, I felt like we might just be stuck and keep like butting our heads together. Truly, forever.
All right. So Scott has a question about how do you determine who would come to the meeting?
Oh, okay.
Okay. So I would, if you need a process for that, then what I would say is meet with a person, the person served, and have this conversation. What are the resources you're currently utilizing, and what are your current needs? So like going back to those first two slides, so we have the one slide with everybody looking in, and we have the other side with everybody around the world. One of those is needs, and one of those is resources, right? So go through and talk with the person and think, okay, here are all the resources. Here's their case manager. Here's their CRP. Here's their rehab count. Here's whomever's involved. Mom's involved. want to have mom there, they want to have sister there, they want to have some other support there. Make sure that you get all those resources down, and then think, okay, am I aware of other resources that are out there? And then approach the person about it. What about this resource that maybe we haven't tapped into yet? Would you be interested in having them come to the meeting? They may or may not be able to provide something. Maybe you're talking to the Goodwill Career Connection Center and you ask somebody from there to come. But here's another resource that might be able to tap us into some additional businesses. So really think about, like, okay, what resources are being used now? Let's stretch a little bit. What other resources could we use? What needs do you have? And then you can look at those needs and you can say, okay, some of those needs are going to be met by these resources, but what are other needs that you have? And again, that can be, I need more industry knowledge. Okay, so who can we bring in that's going to provide more industry knowledge? Particularly in the area of IT, I almost am always involved, God bless my neighbors, because I know people in the IT business from everything from web design to programming and all that kind of stuff. I don't know, in my geeky neighborhood, I guess. But I need somebody from IT in a meeting that has to do with being in an IT career, because I honestly don't know what the words that they are using. So what are their needs? Maybe they need more industry information. Okay, who can I bring in to provide that? Maybe they need more financial management, financial literacy than maybe you can get from a typical workshop, because it's like a super specific need. Maybe you need to call, a lot of times I get called into these things because I'm a benefits planner, so I work with Social Security work incentives. So I go into a lot of meetings, and that's literally all I'm doing, is just making sure that people understand that aspect of it. So I would say break it down into resource and needs, figure out what's already there, and then figure out where you can supplement. I'm hoping that helps. So
I think you mentioned logistics, pulling everybody together, but
yeah.
The one other thing too, and I'm not sure what your situation is with your work environment or your colleagues in the field, but one thing that I have found to be really helpful is just making sure that I know who's out there in the community providing resources. I would say at Voc Rehab, at least in the West Central area office, which is here in the Des Moines area, we have a lot of community providers, even, workforce development, Children and Families of Iowa, Link Associates. I mean, there's just so many people out there providing services that they actually contact us and want to come to our staff meetings and tell us about their programs. And I can tell you, every time that I get information from somewhere, even if it's for a job fair that I know is going to come and go, sometimes I even still keep those flyers just to remember what agencies are putting those on, so that I know that one day when I have a question that pertains to something that somebody did or I once heard that they provide, I have that flyer so I can start at least asking around. And this response is more so for those individuals that are saying, I know my people need these resources, but how do I find them? The other thing too is, when a client is looking for something and I know there's something out there, but I really can't remember what the name of it is or how to get them connected, that is when I start sending out massive emails, of course, not giving the client's contact information, keeping all that confidential, but I'll reach out to Diane. I might reach out to Shannon. I might reach out I'll send an email to all of the counselors in my office, just kind of, I always call it picking people's brains, because, you're not going to remember everything and you're not going to remember every resource out there, but it is so important to connect with those other people in the field that are doing similar work as you, because I can tell you that understanding what somebody else can offer is probably the toughest thing, but probably the most important thing to do. So just keeping those connections. I know we've all heard that, how important connections are, but that's probably been the biggest thing for me, trying to connect with people, because I can't remember what everybody does, but I just start asking away.
I know for sure in Des Moines, that's one of the issues that we deal with, is we are so blessed with so many resources that sometimes it's hard to remember them all.
Yeah.
But what I would say is the IRT concept can also be super beneficial, particularly in those more rural areas where there aren't as many resources, because you guys just flat out don't have that plethora of pick and pull and choose from that we do. You don't have Dress for Success. You don't have Goodwill Career Connect. You don't have all the stuff that we have here in Des Moines, and I get that when you're out there. In that arena, I would really try to pull in those industry experts. If you're talking to somebody and you're trying to figure out how am I going to get this person in small town Iowa employed within this community, invite the director of your Chamber of Commerce to the meeting. Invite someone from the local hospital if the person's interested in healthcare. Invite somebody from the big major manufacturer that is the thing that keeps your town alive. Invite, you know what I mean, like or human resources from that. Those in Des Moines, we have the advantage of a lot. We have a lot of stuff. There, that whole feeling of community, that is what, so IRTs, like when I'm here doing IRTs, I'm all about, let's get past the MOUs, let's get past all the like super like, here's our strategic processes and levels and all that, and let's get down to creating a sense of community for this person. In a small town, you have the sense of community already, you just need to figure out what the processes and procedures, so you're almost working backwards. So in small town, rural Iowa, utilize this concept, and really there, you're gonna have to think outside the box. So the chamber person, ministers, community leaders, the mayor, for God's sake. In these small towns, that's the only option that you have. You have to make the town realize that you know, we all work together. And to make the thing work.
Get to know all of the different social services providers, even your competition. As a job developer, I go out and not only meet with employers all the time, but the other half of the time I meet with all of the providers just to do informational interviews with them to learn about their programs and what are you guys even doing, and what do you offer? And then I make notes and I send that out to my team, and they don't remember what I say. But I keep the information, and so when we need it, we might not need it for a year, we might not need it ever, but we might need it tomorrow at the same time to learn about who's even out there.
So we've been really good at being chatty, and we've got 2 more folks to go through and about 9 minutes to do it in. So these ladies are great, I talk fast. So I'm going to go through a little bit and then have them chime in. Justin, I talked about this a little bit earlier, transition age, out of school youth, learning disability, really unclear interests, like does not know what he wants to do. But because of his learning disability and the fact that he's a very physically able kid, is tending to lean a little towards the trades, but has a lot of apprehension about learning in general and has a lot of apprehension for various reasons about being in the trade. Justin's kind of a collaboration of 2 different, not only is this not him and not his name, but it's really 2 people that I'm kind of mushing together. But we were able to establish something where we had people from 4 different trades, carpenters, laborers, some general trade, come in and talk, and we were able to have a really fabulous conversation about the trades, and the guys in there were just really crazy, awesome, cool, about talking about how we get an image in our head about what somebody working in the construction trades is and what their lifestyle is and what they look like, and they're like, it is such a diverse group and they actually said that the kid that was actually in the meeting was on the spectrum, and he was really worried about social skills on a work site, and he ended up saying that you can throw social skills out the window because everybody's so different and speaks so many different languages on a job site that you don't even really need them. They were able to talk about that. They were able to talk about how you can go in between trades, so how like you could start out with the laborers union, get kind of the scaffolding to learn how the trades work, and then from there move into another trade where maybe you found that was actually your area of interest. So Michelle, I'm gonna let you hammer in. We got not much time.
Okay, so I'll be kind of quick. So the one thing that I really liked about participating in this IRT is that, you know, here I am, I get information about what's trending in the field, and I kind of hang on to it until I kind of hear different or do my own research that something's changed. And I can tell you, like Diane said, she's talking about one individual, but this kind of ended up being an opportunity for 2 different people looking at trades that we work together on. I can tell you that I was focusing on one trade that, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago I really heard was up and rising. Well, in this meeting, you know, I'm still thinking that that's the direction to go, but Diane had recently just met with guys in the trade field, learned that general laborers are highly needed. And I mean, when you look around the city of Des Moines anyway, there's so much new construction that she knew that if these individuals were going to go into a trade, there are actually a few that are have a higher need level right now. So whereas I'm sure we could have still gotten to a same place in the end, it was really nice to have Diane there in that situation where she could say, hey, you know what, I just met with people about this and here's where the need level is across the board. And she was able to get those people to the table to discuss what it would take to become be a part of their program. So that was one thing that stood out for me in this IRT.
And so then we're going to go one other one. This isn't actually an evaluation. This is, again, going back to that idea that doing an IRT with one individual helps you with more than one individual. It's not just the person that you're working with in that particular collaborative meeting that helps you move forward. So Shannon and I worked with a guy who is blind and deaf. He had some work history barriers. He'd worked with everybody. Through CISL, some great work with job development, they had found him a position that they thought was going to work for him. He went to go explore that position, and it turned out that it didn't. He just didn't have the physical capability to do that job. A few days later, we had somebody come in. I had somebody come in, and because I'd been part of that meeting, right, that I'd watched that job kind of fall apart, literally that job fell apart, and like maybe the next week, I had somebody come in who I thought would be a good fit for that job. This involves more IRTs, more collaboration. The guy went in, did an awesome job, but he was also homeless, and so we were dealing with a lot of homeless-related issues. Did IRTs with the shelter and worked with them very closely on just things like things that get super complicated, like how are we going to make sure that he gets a lunch if he leaves before the kitchen opens? I mean, things we needed to work very closely with the shelter and the business to make sure that, like, okay, so they start at 6:45, there's the bus, we had to work with transportation to make sure he could get where he needed to go. And then right as he was about to go in and sign paperwork, he fessed up to a substance abuse problem that was going to become a barrier to the employment literally the day that he was supposed to sign the papers to go to work. And that was, you know, disappointing for a minute. And it went back to the center and we were like, what happened? And the center was able to come back and say, this is a problem. Fortunately, we had such a collaborative and ongoing relationship with that business that I was able to go to the business and say, hey, that not specific what the issue was, but I said, there's a personal issue that he needs to deal with. It's going to take a minute. Hoping we can come back to this after. They said, we'll work it out when he gets done dealing with whatever he's got to deal with. So that kind of opportunity would not have existed if it weren't for the previous IRT. So, and again, that's working with a different job developer that and I mean, blessed too, the job developer who shared the business contact with me, because we all know that people will hold, you start working in this environment and you start really building these strong collaborative relationships and people start sharing their business contacts with you. And that's how this worked. If somebody hadn't literally given me the cell phone number of the guy that I needed to talk to, it wouldn't have happened. So that's the level of collaboration we're talking about. That's the level of reaching outside your comfort zones that we're talking about. And I know that probably most of this isn't rocket science by any means, and a lot of this you probably are already doing in your practice. So this presentation wasn't necessarily meant to provide you with a ton of new information, but it was really just to provide you with a new perspective, new thoughts, maybe hopefully give you a little bit of energy to go back into your job and do some collaborative and figure out how you can be doing some more collaborative work. I included all the DRCs and all the different regions in this slide because this Integrated Resource Team project is part of the DEI project, and these folks in all these different regions are experts on that.
If somebody didn't live in a region that was, you know, served specifically by one of these, what does that look like? If they wanted the support of somebody like you or a nearby DRC?
You know, I think if you I'm not gonna drive to Dubuque, but if you don't live in one of the areas that do this and you really can't figure out what you're, you know, like, can you just help brainstorm? My phone number's on there, my email's on there. I've collaborated with Alaska before. So if I can have
the local workforce office, though,
the local workforce office will. There are going to be regions that are more familiar with the IRT concept, and there's going to be regions that don't have as much familiarity with that. Mm-hmm. But if it's just a matter of figuring out how within my community can I do this, yeah, definitely go into your local workforce office. Like I said, these regions are specific to the DEI project, so they're going to have a little bit more familiarity with it. But you know, it's really just kind of like trying to reinvent, you know, trying to get the sushi. All right. So how do we do that? And there's everybody's contact. So I want to thank these ladies. They are not only great co-presenters, they are great partners, they are great friends. I am every day wake up blessed to know the people that I get to work with on a daily basis.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle, Diane, and Shannon, for the great presentation and strategies and those reminders around collaborating. I'll remind you guys again that today was recorded, and I'll be sure to send that out to the group, and it'll be posted to YouTube. Thank you for your requests for certificates. I will get those done as soon as I can. I know I see a couple of folks have asked about certificates for staff that maybe watch the archive that aren't able to watch live. I've had those questions come in today and in the last couple of months, and I appreciate you guys asking that. I'm happy to help in any way I can, but sometimes it's difficult for me to confirm that staff have attended outside of the live webinars, as well as a capacity issue to just meet your needs and get those certificates back to you. So what I ask is that agencies individually track that and provide that verification for staff who watch the archives. But I'm happy to share my template with you for certificates of attendance related to the community of practices. So I see a couple folks asked that question and reached out today. I'll follow up with you afterwards on that and be happy to share that template with you. I want to remind you again to please complete the 2-question survey for me. It'd be much appreciated. And I'll remind you of next month's webinar, which is on March 13th from 1 to 2 p.m. And that day we're going to be discussing intersectionality and engaging students, job seekers, and family of diverse backgrounds. And we're happy to host Raymond McDede-McCoy from CISL, as well as Ask Resource Center. So we'll see you back March 13th. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.